Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this evening's meeting of the Edinburgh Sir Walter Scott Club. Apologies that you're seeing my face standing here as opposed to that of Ian Torrance. He sends his apologies, he's otherwise engaged downstairs, as it would happen, so you can, you'll doubtless see him around. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for this evening, Dr. Alena Shmakova, who is a researcher and dancer with over 15 years of experience working in historical dance, and that's really taking in an awful lot of stuff, from Renaissance dance, Baroque dance, right to the early 20th century. She's studied with a number of figures in a number of different places as well. She gained her MSc from the University of Dundee and a PhD from the University of Edinburgh, both in life sciences, and she's moved now to follow her interest in her research into Scottish dancers and dance repertoire in the 18th and 19th centuries. She works in a number of organisations, including the National Trust for Scotland, and her own dance troupe, which does dance education and also performances, which we'll see some of this evening, along with, we might see, if you make it along to the dinner in August, you'll see more, called Les Danses Antiques. So it's a pleasure for me to hand over to Alena, who's going to tell us about dance and Sir Walter Scott's work and times. Thanks.
Hello everyone. Thank you, Michael, for the nice introduction and kind introduction. And thank you for coming to listen to me tonight. I was worried a little bit, considering the subject of this club. I was thinking that dance might not be the main interest for you, so thank you very much for coming. Before I start with my talk, I would like to apologize first. As you notice, English is not my first language, and I'm likely to do quite a few mistakes during the next hour or so. Please forgive them in advance. I know that probably some of you know more about Walter Scott and about his life and work, much more than I know. And my talk would primarily be focused on dance history, and in particular on Scottish dance history. So when I was thinking, how can I make this talk interesting for you, I thought that maybe we can look at some of the Walter Scott works and see how he described the dances, and then look at the dance history and known sources, other sources than Walter Scott, to see how actually we can interpret what he wrote and imagine maybe these scenes from slightly different context. So there is not a lot of resources available to study dance history, especially Scottish dance history. In the 18th century, we do have a few country dance collections. We do have some diaries as well, but most of the information is actually scattered in diaries, notes, manuscripts, and sometimes quite difficult task to find this needle in the stack among many books and writings. And interestingly enough, previously Walter Scott's work and his descriptions of dancing scenes were used to look at the Scottish dance history. But before going further, I would like to remind you a little bit about Sir Walter Scott's early years and his education, to see actually how his education fit into the polite education in Scotland at the end of the 18th century. So he was, Sir Walter Scott was born on the 15th of August 1771 and in Edinburgh, but at the age around 2 he contracts polio that actually has quite significant consequences for his physical abilities, because he became lame for one foot. And it's already an obstacle for to become a successful dancer at the end of the 18th century. If today the dancing is quite inclusive, and I did enjoy dancing with people who couldn't walk properly, or in people with disabilities, at that time dancing was much more rigorous activity, so it's quite unlikely that actually Walter Scott could get any dance education at the time. And dance education for the polite society was quite important. Most of the lawyers, advocates, and academics who studied in Edinburgh, they probably also studied dancing in several private schools that existed in Edinburgh at the time. So, returning back to Sir Walter Scott's biography, we know that he actually spent a number of years outside of Edinburgh. The access to dancing masters is even more limited. He spent some time in Bath, but also in the borders. And his years in Edinburgh are primarily around 1779-1783, where he was educated at the High School of Edinburgh, or Royal Edinburgh School, I think it's called now. And also when he studied in Edinburgh University between 1783 and 1786, and then also later in 1789 and 1792. So I was actually I was trying to find the curriculum for the High School of Edinburgh at the time to see whether they employed any dancing masters. High School of Edinburgh at the time actually was primarily boys' school, so the girls were not allowed. And for boys' schools, I actually couldn't find any evidence that they would hire a dancing master for the lessons in the schools, whereas for schools for girls, dancing masters and music masters were quite common at the time. However, looking at various diaries, for example, of people who lived in Edinburgh in the 18th century, in the beginning of the 18th century with the family from the Melliston House, Baylis, we know that they hired the private dancing master to educate the girls, and also from the diaries of Agnes Reid, which were published quite recently, and she and her family lived in Edinburgh at the end of the 18th century. We know that she well, her sons actually attended the Miss Rossignoli school in Edinburgh between around 1780s. Miss Rossignoli was Italian, and she was the most fashionable dancing mistress in Edinburgh at the time. And it's quite a rare occasion actually to have a dancing mistress in the dancing mistress as a fashionable dancing master in a town. At the end of the 18th century. So, however, let's go back to Sir Walter. He's probably unlikely to get a dance education. Firstly, because of his inability to dance. Secondly, because he wasn't exposed to that actively at his schools, and also probably through the attitude of his father. As I said, I'm going to use some of the Sir Walter's writings to look at the Edinburgh dancing life at the end of the 18th century. And actually, I would use in particular his novel Red Gauntlet, that was considered by many critics quite an autobiographic novel, where both characters, Alan and Darcy, thank you, they will represent some qualities of Sir Walter Scott himself. So I'm starting from the beginning. So this is the letter 2 from Alan Fairford to Darcy Latimer. He's saying that his father is saying about the main character, Friend, that he goes to dancing houses and read novels. That the dancing houses amounted only to one night at Lepic's hall, but he danced from night to the morning. And his father obviously meant it with some disapproval. So, despite of that, there is another dancing scene in the same novel, in the letter, and it is described in the letter 12 at quite considerable length. It's a dancing evening at a large house, but the house, not the noble house, not the fashionable house, but rather something like a barn, and it was quite a pleasant evening. And Walter Scott described that there was dancing as part of this evening, and the dances that were performed at this night he described quite in detail, considering other sources. Well, first of all, the musician called Alan to the floor, and let's see us how you can fling. The lasses are waiting. And the dance that Darcy performed, please forgive me, Darcy performed was the old Scott jig, in which you are aware I used to play no sorry figure at Lepic's, when the clumsy movements used to be rebuked by raps over the knuckles with that great professor's fiddlestick. And he also described the tune that they used to dance the jig. It's Merrily Danced the Quaker's Wife and Merrily Danced the Quaker. So, interestingly enough, Lepic or Pix, it's not completely fictional figure. Dancers and dancing masters with this name worked in Edinburgh from the middle of the 18th century. The first mention of them I found around 1747, when Charles Lepic came to Edinburgh to perform at the newly opened Canongate Concert Hall. Not a lot actually survived from this hall, but you can find a plaque at the Royal Mile saying Playhouse and Old Playhouse Close. So this is their. Okay. No, it's not working. So this is where the Canongate Concert Hall was located, and some people who know Edinburgh and Edinburgh history better than me, they actually say that this building preserves part of the Canongate Concert Hall, and particularly this wall used to be part of the Canongate Concert Hall. So here is the advert from the Caledonian Mercury that says that the play Hamlet, Prince of Denmark, will be intercepted with the entertainment by the of dancing by Monsignor Peake, Madame de Fresne, and Miss Thompson. Apart from performing as a dancer, he actually opened a dancing school in Edinburgh around the same time as he arrived, in the middle of July, and we already see the advert about the dancing school in the same paper. And it's particularly interesting because he said that though a stranger, his application known character in London and Paris, both as a dancer and dancing master, will in some degree attenuate the justice so commonly taken against such as obliged to take this method of acquainting the public with his intention. And at the time, there were 3 dancing schools in Edinburgh, and we know that from Mr. Henry Mackenzie's book, The Anecdotes and Egotisms, where he said that Lamotte and Peake were French, and the Downey was a Highlander, and among them, Lepic was supposed to teach males better than Lamotte, who actually managed to attract the most fashionable pupils in Edinburgh at the time. This was Charles Lepic, and according to my research, he actually left Edinburgh in 1749. But in around 1755, I suspect, the family returned back to Edinburgh. Among them was Antoine Lepic. He has been residing in Edinburgh for quite some time, which you can read from this advert in Caledonian Mercury from October 1761. And in 1761, his brother Charles Lepic joined him again to teach dancing in Edinburgh. So it's difficult to establish what sort of a relationship were between previous Charles Lepic and this Charles Lepic. The scholars of British theatrical stage indicate that Charles Lepic, the one that I mentioned on the previous slide, he actually disappeared from the theatrical adverts around 1755. So potentially he decided to retire in Edinburgh and join his brother in running the dancing school here. That hypothesis is supported, for example, again by Henry Mackenzie's Anecdotes, where he said that Lepic was a relation, a grandfather or granduncle of the celebrated dancer of that name, who afterwards figured with so much eclat in London. He's talking about another Charles Lepic, Charles Lepic younger, who actually was quite famous. He did perform around Europe, in London as well, in Germany, but he is actually much better known in Russia because he was one of the Russian ballet fathers. So the Edinburgh dancing master had a son, also a remarkable dancer. He's probably also known as Antoine or Charles. They called themselves the same name through the generations. Anyway, interesting story was said, but interesting, that this son has actually died while dancing in Edinburgh. He performed for the war officer on the ship, and then he jumped too high and he struck his head against the nail. So interesting that despite such a tragedy in the family, they decided to return and continue living in Edinburgh. And I could track the dancing school somewhere until probably 1782, beginning of 1780s. Then they also left Edinburgh again. So the dance that we were actually talking about in the beginning in the Red Gauntlet novel was the jig. Mr. Latimer performed a jig at this evening, and there are some, as I said, there are some manuscripts that describe Scottish dancing from the time, and one of them is a notebook by a dancing master, John McGill, who practiced in the Borders but also in the Dunes, as you can see from the title of the notebook. The dancing steps of a hornpipe and jig, likewise 12 of the best and newest country dances, and so on and so forth. Here I give you the illustration what these steps actually are. It's a great source. This is the only description of Scottish hornpipes and jig steps from the middle of the 18th century. And the best what we could get from this is 5 hops aside and sink forward. There is some Highland step, double step forward, short streaks forward, back hop backward. For me, it's a torture. I know that there is a description, but getting something sensible from that is quite difficult. But what I could give you, what we could grasp from this is probably the high amount of hops and cuts. So it indicates that jig at the time was quite a bouncy dance. So, but if he learned the jig, yes please, if he learned the jig with the French dancing master, and French dancing masters were much better in describing the dance style of the time. I decided to show you what French jig could look like. This is the reconstruction made by my fellow dancer from the Montplaisir Dance Company. It's also based in Russia, and this is jig from an opera Tancred. And this opera was staged throughout the 18th century at the Paris Opera. So let's try. From the 18th century. It's not a couple dance, it's just a solo performance by a lady. And I know that at that time, ladies' performances tended to be a bit gentler than the male performances. And also, this dance was practiced in the social ballrooms. It's probably a little bit simplified from the theatrical version of the dance. So we could expect a higher cuts, higher battements, a little bit more energy and vigilance from the male performances. But when I started reading the novel, I actually was a little bit surprised by the reaction of the audience. Then Darcy Latimer performed the dance with the lady in the green mantle. The audience laughed at him, though he was very good at the Lepic classes. And I'm actually not sure why the audience laughed. From the text, I couldn't. The text didn't indicate that he made mistakes or he was clumsy, but nevertheless, the reaction was quite intriguing. And then I was thinking that maybe the reaction was intriguing because, as we knew from the early descriptions, that it was a rustic entertainment. The dances were, of course, the Scottish jigs and reels and twosome dances with a strathspey hornpipe for the interlude. And the want of grace on the part of the performers was amply supplied by truth of ear, vigor, and decision of step, and the agility proper to the northern performers. So probably the jig that he learned with Lepic was not suited to the environment where it was performed. Despite that, we know that Darcy enjoyed the evening. He said, "I felt a great deal more pleasure in this rustic revel than I have done at the more formal balls and concerts in your famed city," meaning Edinburgh here. So, and here is a picture by Allen, I believe, yes, by David Allen, that kind of is a representation of the evening that Darcy Latimer attended somewhere in Dumfriesshire. So, after his, failure, I would say, with the jig, he decided to go further, and he proposed to do a minuet with his partner. And it was obviously wouldn't be appropriate, as the lady in green mantle told him. So she thanked me and told me haughtily enough she was here to encourage the harmless pleasures of these good folks, but was not disposed to make an exhibition of her own indifferent dancing for their amusement. So, what is the minuet? And why it was not appropriate to dance in that particular setting? So this is a picture from circa 1770, and it's actually from above assembly rooms. And as you can see, it's a very polite dance. It's been performed in the UK from the end of the 17th century until the beginning of the 19th century. And it was a couple dance, usually performed by one couple only at the time, whereas the rest of the audience would watch the performance. The minuet came from France, so it probably was taught by French dancing masters in Edinburgh. But as you can see, this is what the lady in green mantle meant. Nobody else would dance for the performance of the minuet, and it was definitely not what the company wanted at the time. And instead of the minuet, she proposed to do a country dance. And now I have a question to you, actually. How many of you enjoy Scottish country dancing? Okay, great. Quite a few. Great, that's perfect. So, if you remember, in the novel, she chose a country dance as an opportunity to talk with her partner. So, people who enjoy Scottish country dancing, do you think there is an opportunity to enjoy a conversation during a Scottish country dance? Hardly. Hardly. I think I find it so energetic, and in the modern design, it's actually engaged as many people in the set as possible. So it was not designed for people to talk. But obviously, it was not the case in Walter Scott's time, and we know that from other sources, for example, from rules of the assembly houses. Then they said that the sets at the time was no more than 10 couples long. It was only one set who would perform the dance, and it was only one couple who would dance during that time. So, knowing these rules, we kind of understand why the country dance was chosen as a conversational moment, because as soon as you finish with your leading part, if you're the first couple, you're at the end of the set, and then you're waiting for the couples above to come and dance with you. You have plenty of time to talk and socialize. and there is no chaperones listening or watching you, as was also highlighted in this great paragraph from the Red Gauntlet, because two ladies who surrounded a lady in the green mantle, they were actually sitting, and she was dancing with Mr. Darcy and managed to warn him about some dangers that are awaiting him if he stays here. So, and I'm coming back to the quote that I already used and to the slide I already used to you, because both minuets and country dances, the dances that were chosen for this particular entertainment, they were actually fashionable dances at the time. They were not particularly suited to the rustic entertainment, to the barn dances. And I'm actually finding it very surprising that Lady in Green Mantle and Darcy found any partners to perform a country dance in Dumfriesshire at that time. And from this quote, reading it further, we still know that Darcy enjoyed the evening, and one of the reasons he enjoyed it is because I was a person of more importance to the presiding matron of the Broken food, that I had the means of rendering myself to the far-famed Miss Nicky Murray, the patroness of your Edinburgh Assemblies. So, and with this, I'm going to switch from this evening that evening entertainment in Dumfriesshire to the Edinburgh Assemblies, and I'm probably Miss Nicky Murray because both of the ventures actually existed at the time. Edinburgh Assembly could be tracked to the beginning of the 18th century. It was started around 1710 first by the Hamilton family, then there was some gap, and then there was the famous assembly of 1723 that was led by lady directresses with Countess of Panmure as the head of the assembly. By the 1746, the Edinburgh Assembly, from a private venture of Hamilton's family, became something like a charitable organization with the treasurer of Royal Infirmary and charitable workhouses on board of on the board. But the female leadership of the assembly, the leadership on the dance floor, continued in Edinburgh and in Scottish society probably, well, I would say probably till the 21st century, because it seems like ladies would be navigating the dancing floor. They would tell who would dance with whom and what exactly will be danced, at least between 1723 and until 1787. So that assembly was located in the new assembly close that is just off the Royal Mile near the St. Giles Cathedral. And this is probably the old assembly that was mentioned in some of biographies of Sir Walter Scott in some of his books. We know that this hall was neither elegant or commodious. The door is so disposed that a stream of air rushes through it into the room, and as the footmen are allowed to stand with the flock's bow in the entry before the entertainment is half over, the room is filled with smoke almost to the suffocation. So the question of building a new assembly hall existed in Edinburgh society since 1746, immediately as the charitable association was formed. So this is the one of the memoirs of the life of Sir Walter Scott, published by Lockhart around 1852. And here's he was saying that Mr. Walter Scott became very interested in the female society around 1790s. And one of the opportunities to get together with the other sex was actually at the old assembly rooms. And a lady of high rank, the late Countess Duchess of Sutherland, remembered him in that old assembly rooms. Actually, looking at his biography and knowing the history of assembly halls in Edinburgh, I would say the Countess Duchess of Sutherland was wrong. By the time that Walter Scott could engage with the old assembly close, that building was actually closed, and the assembly was relocated in the George Square. And this is another. This is actually from from another fragment from the Gauntlet, where Walter Scott himself says that everybody was waiting for the new assembly rooms in Edinburgh at the time. But the problem is, it's very difficult to use this phrase to date the novel, because honestly, they wanted it from 1746. So, what was this assembly rooms that he attended? And I think that that Countess actually remembered him from the George Square Assembly. The George Square Assembly, the building itself still exists. Well, now it's apartment buildings. It's located near the University of Edinburgh campus, 1416 Buccleuch Place to be precise. And this is the how the George Square at the time looked like. So the ancient dancing establishment in the bow, this is the 1710, and the assembly close, this is the new assembly close, I know nothing about, said Henry Cockburn in his memoirs. Everything of the kind was meant to be annihilated by the erection of the Hansap apartments in George Street. I think he meant here the George Street assembly rooms that still exist. However, they were built in 1787. Yet, even against this, the new part of the old town made a gallant struggle, and in my youth, the whole fashionable dancing, as indeed the fashionable everything, clung to George Square. There in Buccleuch Place, close to the southeastern corner of the square, most beautiful rooms were erected, which for several years then the new town piece of presumption entirely into the shade. And here were the last remains of the ballroom discipline of the preceding age. Martinet Dovagers and Venerable Beau acted as masters and mistresses of the ceremonies and made all the preliminary arrangements. No couple could dance unless each party was provided with the ticket prescribing the precise place and the precise dance. And actually, looking at the map, so this is the 1416 Buccleuch Place, and this is 25 George Square, the house where Sir Walter Scott father lived, well, and Walter Scott family lived. So Walter Scott probably witnessed everything was going on here, because these buildings would not exist at the time. And by 1824, when the novel Red Gauntlet was published, the only assembly rooms were on the George Street, and we still know them today. They were opened in January 1787 with the ball by the very fashionable Hunters Society. And this is the picture of the assembly from the 1829. And this is where George IV was entertained when he arrived in Edinburgh in 1822 to visit Sir Walter Scott. So. And I would like now to move to the project, which I did together with the Edinburgh Sir Walter Scott Club, and the club supported this project. So it's Strathspey for Two, performed at one of the balls for the King when he visited in August 1822. We know that Sir Walter Scott actually organized the whole affair of the royal visit at the time. However, the balls was not particularly organized by him, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. So, although the assembly rooms that we know today are almost the same building, it's still not the same, because the building was actually changed later in the Victorian era. But this is the map from the accounts of the royal visit. I'm not sure how the architecturally it was changed, because it still has two ballrooms as we know them today. So there is the staircase, there is the rotunda, there is also the main ballroom that's still a ballroom in the assembly rooms today if you visit them. I think the changes happened here. So now we have a large music room here with the stage and some chairs. But for the royal occasion, that room didn't exist. It was something different there. And for the royal occasion, they created a special extension of the building. So they opened up the windows and created something like a balustrade where they served some supper for people who came for the balls. Whereas the visit of George IV to Edinburgh is well documented with numerous paintings. You can see how he was given a key from the Holyrood, some processions from around Princess Street, the processions between Princess Street and the procession between the Holyrood Palace and the castle, the dinner, the church ceremony. The only events that were not depicted at all were balls. The two balls that were conducted during the George IV visit. And the best thing that I could find is this sketch by Turner that is now in the Tate's collection. And this is that rotunda that was what was created for this visit. This is where people had the supper. So, two sketches. Oh, sorry, two sketches of this place. There are some memoirs of the events. We know that King actually attended the ball only for 1 hour, and William Murray, who was the Edinburgh Theatre Royal manager at the time, he was actually orchestrated the both balls, especially the Piers Ball. The interesting account that it was actually not a dancing ball. And I spoke with many dance researchers, asking them what do they know about not dancing balls, and I think I couldn't get anything. So this is my hypothesis, that people came to see the king, and dancing was not that important there. However, they happened, and the dancing lasted during the king's visit and after the king's visit. The king himself didn't dance. He was not the right age, not the right physical form by that time. However, I would say George IV, when he was Prince of Wales, he was quite a capable dancer. He really enjoyed Scottish dancing. He employed two dancing masters for his daughter Charlotte to teach her Scottish dances. And if you look at the descriptions of the balls from his youth, there is a lot of Scottish country dances and Scotch reels that he did. And there is also a myth that he, together with Duchess of Gordon, who was an important political figure at the time, they enjoyed a royal version of Highland Flynn. No more description of this is available, unfortunately. Anyway, the Caledonian handball that was slightly later was very similar, less formal, and this is the only reference of the music that was played at these balls. There was an air of breaking castle. The band, we know what was the band who entertained the king and the audience for these balls. It was led by Nathaniel Gow, one of the sons of the famous Scottish composer and musician Neil Gow. And there is also a lot of descriptions in the papers, but this is the most detailed one, where the description said what was actually happening during the ball, who was wearing what. And the most interesting, some dances that were on the program. So the ball was opened by a reel, which was succeeded by a country dance, both of which His Majesty seems to witness with much pleasure. And the most interesting description for me was that a lady and a gentleman in a Highland dress danced a strathspey, with much taste, which His Majesty so greatly admired that he clapped his hands in token of approbation. And then he left. So, So this is the basis where the whole project about recreating dances started. Strathspey for two. I'm sure you're all familiar with the music of strathspeys. I'm sure that some of you actually did probably some strathspey type country dances. Some of you probably also witnessed performances of a Highland version of strathspey reel that was usually done by 3 or 4 people. So strathspey for two sounded a little bit strange and very unusual for Scottish traditional dance repertoire. So if they were to perform a strathspey for 3 or 4, that dance is already recreated, but strathspey for two was a little bit of the mystery. And interestingly enough, talking about the balls, I was thinking about the minuets that were performed at those balls. They were usually open the balls, or they would be used as a performance piece during the ball. And I also knew from other references and other sources that there was a dance called Straspe Minuet that would be performed by two people. The first mention of this dance is 1745, and interestingly enough, that dance was performed for Bonnie Prince Charlie while he was entertained at Lute House near Blair Athol. There is some descriptions of Straspe Minuet from other diaries from 1770, so the dance didn't disappear with the collapse of the Jacobite cause. For example, Captain Edward Topham left quite a detailed description of the dance, saying that the dance is composed from a minuet as a figure and Straspe music and Straspe steps. So the next point for me was to find the Straspe steps. So we often think, especially in the context of dancing, that we dance in the same way now as they dance in the 18th century. I hope that by showing you some pictures and some other facts, you started to suspect that it probably wasn't the case, and the dancing was quite different. So I was lucky enough to find a source in the National Library for Scotland. That's another dancing master notebook called Contra Dances à Paris, 1819. The name is not very helpful, let's say. You wouldn't suspect that this notebook might contain anything related to Scotland because it's Contra Dances à Paris. But interestingly enough, it's contained a large section describing the Straspe steps from the time. The notebook is dated around 1819, so it's very, very close to the events of 1822. So we decided to combine all these points, the structure of the minuet, Straspe music, Straspe steps found in this notebook, to try to recreate the choreography and recreate the dance as it would look like. So in my final video should demonstrate our results. Okay. I'm sorry.
Oh, here we go. Right, there we go.
The king had been in Edinburgh between 15th and 29th of August, entertained by the intense program of events aiming to showcase Scotland, its people and culture. The program was curated by Sir Walter Scott and included a military parade, a procession, a civil banquet, visits to Edinburgh Castle and Holyrood Palace, visits to the theatre, and a special church service at St. Giles Cathedral. There are also two balls hosted by Peers and Caledonian Hunt Society in Edinburgh Assembly rooms at George Street. The king was keen on everything Scottish, which influenced the selection of dances and music played at these balls. Descriptions from the newspapers and diaries of the time indicated that the king spent 1 hour on both balls in the ballroom where traditional reels and strasses were performed. Interestingly, the description of Peers' ball shows that there was a performance of the Straspe for two by a lady and a gentleman. We were interested in this video to recreate this dance using period dance instructions of the time. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this fragment of the video. It's just a fragment. The whole project, the whole video takes about 16 minutes, and we in details explain how the reconstruction was made, how we approached the steps, instructions there. It's going to be available shortly on the YouTube, so whoever is interested to learn the Straspe in the style of early 19th century, you're very welcome to try. And the final note, I'm very grateful to these organizations who helped me to deliver this project. Early Dance Circle, Traditional Dance Forum Scotland, the Edinburgh Revolter, Scott Club, and also Ivor Guest Research Grant for the Edinburgh Assembly's part. And thank you very much for listening to me. I hope you enjoyed this dance excursus in Edinburgh, Edinburgh late 18th century. And I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them.
So thank you ever so much, Alena, for a fascinating talk, which I think really beautifully brought to life so many aspects of that I think I think take for granted. And no, actually, I think I'll read those dance scenes in Red Gauntlet and elsewhere, trying to make a bit more sense of them and sort of work out why particular dances are in there. Now, I shan't say much more, but have we got any questions? Right, Dermot.
Yeah, could I ask a question about the other way around, really? When Sir Walter Scott was in Paris, after the defeat of Napoleon, a group of Russian princesses danced for him. It's in his biography. And I was wondering what sort of dances it would have been, but he certainly enjoyed them.
So it's after the defeat of the Napoleon, so I suppose it's 1814, 1815, something around that. Walter Scott lived in a fascinating time from the dance history point of view, because by the 1800s the dance culture completely changed. Minuets and country dances that we mentioned in the Gauntlet became unfashionable, and instead of them new dance forms came. It was waltzes, quadrilles, cotillions, and by that this was the main dancing forms until the 1820s in the UK. So actually we know from the description of the George IV balls that apart from everything Scottish, they also danced quadrilles and waltzes in the other room. But talking about Russian culture, it was also slightly different to the British culture at the time. And we know it from various British sources and describing the visits of Russian monarchs in Scotland and in England in 1814. Then Alexander I came to England as part of the alliance, where there was three of them coming. And also from the later visit of his brother, Duke Nicholas, who came in 1816, and he actually visited Scotland in 1817, I believe. So from those visits we know that the masters of ceremonies here included polonaises and waltzes in the program. And from the descriptions of the Russian balls at Vienna Congress, it was again polonaises and waltzes. So this is one hypothesis, that what could be performed in Paris and what Walter Scott could witness, a polonaise and followed by a waltz. And another hypothesis is that by that time another dance became popular in Russia, but not yet in France or UK. It was mazurka. And we know that, for example, in 1829, then Duke of Devonshire visited Russia as a special ambassador. He took lessons in mazurka and he brought them back to the UK. Sorry, it was more detailed answer than everybody expected.
Very interesting.
Have we any for Peter? That's a quick hand.
Sorry.
Hang on, we have Peter. Far away.
Too many Miss Rose hopping here. Go there first.
Oh, right, okay. On you go. On you go.
They're wonderful in the back row. They're wonderful. I was just going to ask you, I see in your credits that you've got an early music research group. Have you by any chance had time to visit number 12 Coates Crescent in Edinburgh, being the headquarters of the Royal Scottish Country Dance Society, where they have thousands of devised dances for a long, long time? The lady in charge of it was a lady called Milligan, and there's a huge archive, I'm sure, for you to get further and further researches into. I happened to be involved with the organisation a long, long time ago, so there's tons for you to research.
I am aware about the archives. I tried to arrange the visit, but it was happened during the COVID time and the archives were closed, unfortunately. Luckily, a lot of materials from the RCDS archives are now available digitally as well. And as far as I remember, the McGill manuscript I took from this digital collection. Sorry, I didn't acknowledge it properly. Yes, it's a very. They do have very interesting collection. I do have a number of sources that I would like to look at that are at the RCDS possessions. I started, how to say, I've been mostly involved through the years with historical dance and in particular with the 18th century dance. Recently I started to do more Scottish country dancing, and I'm currently working through the teachers, RCDS teacher scheme to get a qualification for that. Yes.
Right, Peter, I think we're allowed to ask that.
That family of peaks, in the contemporary material you showed us, they're either peak or Le Peak. By the time I've read Gauntlet, they've been feminised as La Peak, if I'm right, haven't they? The Scots and his readers would have thought that was a funny name, you know. Peak in the sense of high-strung, taking of offence, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wonder, can you locate the... There's a doggerel rhyme, in the fit of pique she married a Greek. That's how British people say it, as a spoof name, you know. Is there any further evidence of this family that they existed? And might you look in Edinburgh street directories at the time to see where they might have been located, for example?
Postal addresses. No, I haven't checked the postal addresses, and anyway, they were more kind of... The database is richer in the 19th century rather than the 18th century. But it's also alien archives, alien register in the city of Edinburgh archives, and they unfortunately also closed during the lockdown. And the available version is from 1784, that is slightly later, and I couldn't see Lepic's there by that time already.
Yes.
Well, that slippage. I mean, Scott can occasionally be quite fast and loose when he's using when he's operating it with another language.
Yeah, this is a French surname.
Mm-hmm.
It is.
Yes, they were a family of French dancing masters.
Now, Lucy, you've had your hand up for a while.
First of all, Elena, thank you ever so much, because that was a really fascinating talk and really brought, as Michael said, another part of Scott's works to life. But I was sort of slightly fascinated by that list of dance steps that you showed us, and you know that sort of baffling list of steps. And I wondered how consistent steps were from, say, the sort of 18th century when they're written down in that way. How consistent they are in sort of then us, you as an expert, looking at them and being able to interpret what on earth they mean for you to do physically, and how consistent those instructions are for people to pick up and read.
So I would say generally with British dance technique, everything is complicated. First of all, there is not a lot of British sources describing British dance styles, especially in regards to country dancing. There is plenty of books, manuscripts with the country dance figures, but there is only 2 books that said something about the steps, and the rest is basically need to be pulled from the diaries or from something else, and from foreign sources. I think now the interesting research is going on in Germany, because Germans, sorry, I'm going to say a stereotype, but they were very good in describing things. They were very meticulous. They've been and they are very meticulous. The recent work, they recently, there was a work, sorry, they just recently transcribed a great manual by Mr. Taubert, who was a dancing master in Germany, where he described steps in details. So they transcribed the manual in English, and some other books who would say about the British steps, because for the British they didn't need to write the steps; they knew them. It was common to them, but for Germans it was something new. So they described those things. So. So to know what was actually danced, it's actually worth to look at the foreign dancers' manuals. The dancing culture was very mixed at the time. There was no standards. Like today, we have the Royal Scottish Country Dance Society. You could go to Australia, you could go to Canada and enjoy a Scottish country dance, and it would be probably the same country dance that you would enjoy in Scotland. But it wasn't the case in the 18th and 19th centuries, because standardization wasn't yet in place. Every dancing master would teach something different. So every manual would be different. We have 4 descriptions of a pas de minuet, one with the basic steps of the minuet, with different timings from different masters who believed that their version was the most gracious and the most elegant and basically the best. I think it's similar to today, actually. Anyway, so no, there is no consistency between different sources. Dancing manuals was also just one side of the story. So it's like the best idea of the dancing master, how it should be in the ideal world. It's not necessarily what happened in the ballroom either. So you need the dance in ideal situation to reconstruct the dance with any level of authenticity. You need the dancing manual, you need the music instructions, and you need the descriptions of people who saw how this dance was performed. It never happened. So for the Strathspey for 2, we faced numerous problems when we started to recreate it. There was only one source for the Strathspey steps of that time. It was probably taught in France rather than in Scotland. So it's French version of Strathspey step, but I told you before that they might be better in describing the British dancers. And sometimes, when you do, I cannot say it's a reconstruction, I say it's recreation, because there was a number of decisions that we had to face in order to understand the instructions. Yes, with British sources everything is complicated. With French sources everything is much easier, because they invented something like a dance notation, similar to the music notation. And it made the life of dance historians much easier, because it's a standardization. And it was a standardization because French decided to form the Academy of Dance at the end of the 17th century. It's the earliest Academy of Dance in the world, 1662. So these sources are more consistent. And that's why if you start looking at the dance history, there was a lot of works on French dancing scene, because it's just basically better described than any other scene in the world. Sorry, it was again a long answer.
I've got one. I'll take one final question from the front here. Yeah.
I've heard it. By the way, thank you very much indeed for that absolutely delightful talk. I've heard it said that country dance comes from contredanse rather than a dance of the country. And if it comes from contredanse, what is the exact meaning of that? Is that man and woman dancing separately, or what is it?
It's a very good question, and this is a highly, I guess, discussed subject in terms of what is the origin of the country dances. I think the consensus is that the country dances are coming from England. The earliest mentions of country dances they have from Elizabethan time, for example, and then Elizabeth I would go on a tour around England, and the local population would present her with some form of the dance. Those dances were not truly kind of folk dances as we would say now. They were choreographed by the local dancing masters as well. And we could see the influence of, for example, Italian dancing culture to in the creation of country dances as well, so it didn't just come out of nowhere. Later, country dances, they moved around Europe. In Scotland, we know that they were taught probably in the early 17th century, and potentially Duke of York, who resided in the Holyrood Palace in the 1680s, he probably practiced them quite actively there. The first publication of country dance figures is from 1651 by Playford dancing master, and around 1680s a French dancing master came to the court in England by the Louis XIV, by the Louis XIV order, because he was interested what are those English country dances, and he brought back to France several of those country dances that were performed at the court. I would say French didn't like the English style of dancing. It wasn't standardized at all. So you could choose your own steps for example, for setting parts or to do some other dance figures. And this is not the way how French dancing masters with the French Dance Academy would teach the pupils. So the dancing master started to standardize the country dances, and he published a special manuscript for the king and for the royal family, contra dances, about English contra dances, again around 1680s. I've read that French actually took the word country dance as a directly, but they changed it slightly to contra dance. One of the hypotheses why, it's maybe to indicate that it was indeed the column of people that would perform a country dance. But interestingly enough, apart from fitting the English country dances with the French steps, they also decided they didn't like the column structure that much, and they adapted the country dances from themselves, making them in square-like formations. And from these practices, we could see later the emergence of the cotillions and quadrilles. So it's all coming into the circle.
Thank you.
I get the distinct impression that we could spend the entire evening asking questions of our speaker and actually being stunned each time by just how fulsome a reply we might receive. And it really is incredibly impressive and just thoroughly interesting. So I'm going to invite Dermot Gunn to deliver a vote of thanks on behalf of the club.
Well, you said most of what I would say now, Mr. Chairman. It has been a fascinating talk, a fascinating evening. When I read about it, I wondered what has Scott to do with dancing. I remember the thing in Paris, in fact he appreciated that. Probably very nice, charming Russian princesses as well. But what you've done, you've given us a wonderful idea of the development of dance in the 18th century in particular. On the other hand, and also, I may say, you brought us to understand better the significance of the assembly rooms as a venue for such occasions. I know that Scott wouldn't have been able to dance because of his infirmity, but he must have enjoyed it the same way as King George IV probably did, and many other people who couldn't dance but could appreciate a ball or watching simply people dance, which you did so cleverly with the Strathspey. What is interesting to me is the sort of the mix, the influence, first of all, France with Monsieur Lepic, And then we've got an influence from the Strathspey and this sort of thing, this sort of amalgam of influences, which had made it a fascinating talk. And quite honestly, as the chairman has said, you know all the answers, madam. You do, and you were fantastic in the depth of your knowledge and putting it over to us. Indeed, I'm most grateful for you to come in this evening, and thank you for making this a wonderful, entertaining evening. Thank you very much.
Lovely. And